briefly, if you could, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role in the crypto economy.
Well, I've been a cryptocurrency enthusiast since 2012. Is when I first bought my first Bitcoin, and I was studying computer science at the Faculty of Engineering at the Lund University, and as my cryptocurrency interest grew, I pivoted my studies towards blockchain technology that underpins the cryptocurrency systems that we have. And so I started to do coursework that was related to the cryptographic primitives that build the components for blockchain technology. And I wrote a master's thesis on blockchain technology, and then I started to work for a fintech firm that built matching engines and clearinghouse technologies for global exchanges and clearinghouses around the world. I worked for them up until 2019 when Nasdaq acquired the firm, and then I started my own cryptocurrency hedge fund, which is the office where we're at right now. But the role in the cryptocurrency space, like I was not public with my identity until 2017, and the first project that I publicly commented on was the Iota protocol. And the reason for that was that I had the head of the research department at Cinnober, the company that got acquired by Nasdaq that I worked for. He was very skeptical when it came to cryptocurrency, and then one day he found a paper that he thought did something innovative, like interesting research, and he dropped the Iota white paper on my desk and said, "Look at this, this is something that you should, like this is some new type of innovation that could be potentially interesting." And then I started to go through the marketing materials of the Iota project, and they described themselves as like endlessly scalable, like unlimited scalability, zero fees, and 100% decentralized. And if those three things are true, then that means I should go home and sell all my Bitcoin now and buy Iota, because they've like solved the scalability trilemma. Like it's very important breakthrough that impacts my financial position. So it wasn't like it didn't feel like I had that much of a choice, but to start to investigate and look at the thing, because my like the head of the research department, he was a very skilled coder and a smart guy. So if he took an interest in it, then there should be something of value there. So I started to look at the Iota project, and I saw that the entire, like, what's most important to me as a cryptocurrency person is the security of the thing. Like, can this thing be hacked? And that's when I started to try to understand the security model. And the security model of Iota at the time, as described in the white paper, was that you would aggregate all the, so what they do with the transactions is that everyone attaches a small proof of work on each transaction that they send. And they generate that proof of work on their own laptops when they send a transaction. And it would be the aggregate of all those transactions, proof of works in aggregate, that would be the cumulative proof of work for the system. But when you think about it, like, it's only like a couple of seconds before you make a transaction, and when you make a transaction, which in cryptocurrency can be like once every a few weeks, a few times a day, or once every few years, and it's generated on a standard laptop. So like the aggregate doesn't have to be that much if you compare it to what like an ASIC, like a specially purpose designed chip could do. So I started to run the numbers, and I thought, well, you could attack the system with like 3 ASICs, and you could outcompete like tens of millions of users if they're not very active users. And so I just thought to myself, like, there's no way that this can be secure, this model. Like, and right now, is it attackable right now? So I started to ask around in the developer chat, and they said, well, we have the coordinator node, and the coordinator node was a single node that was responsible for confirming each and every transaction in the system. So it had the ability to not confirm certain transactions, or confirm 2 conflicting transactions and attack the system if it wanted to. So the coordinator node was like the ultimate centerpiece of the entire system, and if that node went down, the entire system would go down. So that was the discovery that I made when I was looking at the project, and that's why when I got so frustrated with the marketing materials that described the project as 100% decentralized, but the reality was that it was 100% centralized. So that large distinction between the reality of the project and the marketing materials was that, and also this project, it was like the 5th largest on CoinMarketCap. It was a multi-billion-dollar project, and so that's what led me to publish an article just to inform the rest of the community that there's a problem here that people are not talking about, that the entire system can go down if one node goes down. So I published the article, and then in the span of 24 hours, the project fell by like $800 million. It was like 50% of the market cap just disappeared from the project falling in value. And then 2 weeks later or something like that, the one node that I had pointed out was controlling the entire system had a maintenance issue. So the entire system did go down. And for up until those 2 weeks, I had been in like very aggressive communication. Like, the Iota founders are known for being very abrasive, and they didn't take kindly to the article that I wrote, and they started to do like ad hominem attacks on my character. And like, first they wouldn't admit that I was a real person. They'd say that I was a sock puppet account attacking the system. So I had to come out with my name and like put a like, this is the company that I work for, and they said like, can you send us like a picture of your business card and stuff like that. They wouldn't listen to the criticism that I had. So that's when I became public with my identity and stood by my criticism, and we argued back and forth. And you can see this, you can still Google for the blog post today, like Iota is centralized, and you'll find the article, and then you'll find David and Sergey Ivancheglo, who was the CTO of the project. Their comments there are very like completely dismissing everything that I'm saying. And then 2 weeks later, the entire system goes down because of this node, and that sort of started the altcoin slayer career for Eric Wall. And then I kept doing that. I started to look at other projects, and then people knew that I was the real deal, that I had the competency to look at what's actually going inside on the technical developments of the project and what's being said in the marketing materials, and make the distinction and tell the truth of what I think. So I was doing that thing for a number of years, and that's how I got acknowledged by the cryptocurrency industry. That's why Richard Hart wanted me to opine on his project when he launched his project. Right now, some people call me the former altcoin slayer, because I've taken an interest in DeFi. I think that DeFi is genuinely interesting, and I think that there are layer 2 solutions that are being built on top of Ethereum that are also genuinely interesting, especially in the zero knowledge proof domain and in the optimistic rollup domain. And if you are like a Bitcoin maximalist, you should not, like, that's a no-go zone. But I think that those things are interesting. I think that there is great promise to DeFi. I'm not saying that 90% of it isn't like Ponzi and vaporware and bullshit, but there's some really important stuff going on inside of that ecosystem that I think can change how finance works, especially the plumbing of finance and the ability for people to create new financial instruments and have those interact with each other in a new permissionless way that just, it moves so much faster, like financial innovation now, than when I was working at Cinnober. Like, if we wanted to build a matching engine and we wanted to improve that matching engine and we wanted to make it more capital efficient, we want to make the ordering logic different in some way, there were only a few companies that were building these types of matching engines and clearing logics for those systems and to innovate in that space. Even though we had very skilled engineers, it was still slow. It's much faster now when anyone can participate, and there's a financial incentive for anyone to participate and build these systems. So now we have like the internet innovation type of explosion in finance, in financial infrastructure. But those thoughts are forbidden in the Bitcoin maximalist view. And I used to adhere to what the Bitcoin maximalists thought, because I also used to think that any type of functionality that can be designed inside of an altcoin, you can build that as a layer on top of Bitcoin, and you can use the root consensus mechanism and the strength of the Bitcoin system to enable that level of expressiveness and DeFi activity. But I think it's become clear now that Bitcoin cannot act as the root consensus mechanism for very complex contracts. So Bitcoin cannot resolve a dispute in a roll-up. Bitcoin cannot validate a zero knowledge proof of any complex type. So if you want to build a DeFi platform right now, I don't think that it's fair to say that Bitcoin can do that, not with the current technology constraints, not even with Taproot or Simplicity or any of the other tools that or innovations that people think is going to help Bitcoin go into that space. some people say that Stacks, like the Stacks blockchain, which is like a meta layer on top of Bitcoin, and that the rootstock sidechain, that those things enable the type of expressiveness that you need in order to enable DeFi, but they don't actually inherit the full strength of the like rootstock. It does barely inherit any of the consensus strength from Bitcoin. Stacks inherits some, but not all of it. So I wouldn't say that Stacks is more secure than Ethereum. Stacks is definitely not as secure as Bitcoin is. So if you want the most secure DeFi anywhere, then that's still Ethereum today. At least when you go in and you want some type of expressiveness in the DeFi, you want automated market makers, and you want lending protocols and oracles. When you go into that domain, then you're not going to find that type of DeFi activity in any Bitcoin-related product that does the same thing. So that's why I'm now paying attention to the Ethereum space. And when I'm paying attention to the Ethereum space, it means that I also have to pay attention to the Ethereum killers and all the governance tokens and applications that are being built on top. So now I'm fully immersed in that world also. And there's, to be honest, a lot of alpha that you can generate by being involved in that domain. So you can increase your Bitcoin holdings if that's your ultimate goal. Then looking into this stuff and investing in that space, that's a great way for you to still be a Bitcoiner and build up your Bitcoin stack if that's what you want to do.
Okay, so let's bring it round to why we're here today. I want you to take me back to that moment when you first heard of Hex.
Well, the first time I heard of Hex was here in Sweden. I don't know if it was called Hex at the time, but Richard was here at a conference that was called Bloxpo, which was in 2018, and he said that he was forking Bitcoin. So he said, I'm going to create a Bitcoin fork, and obviously this was pretty soon after Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Diamond and those forks had been made, and Richard wanted to make something like that. So he was also going to fork Bitcoin. And this is the project that later on became Hex. But when I first heard the Hex name was, I think I might have heard about it on Twitter, and then when I went to the conference in Malta, which I think was in 2019, as I went there, I was supposed to speak at a panel at the AI and blockchain conference in Malta. And when I got there, Richard was literally standing in the entrance as I was coming with my luggage into the building, and he said, Eric, let's do an interview about Hex. And I knew Richard from before then because he was here in Sweden, and he was a blast during the Bloxpo conference. Like, he was charismatic. He debated our politicians, like our leaders in politics, around the cashlessness of in Sweden, that we are a very cashless society, and the risks that comes with. And he just like crushed the politicians that looked like they hadn't thought about this issue and the types of attacks you can make on a country that doesn't have a backup system in case the digital payment systems fail. And then after that, we went out to bars, and Richard danced on the bar, and we had a good time. Like, he danced on tables on the bar, and I got to spend some time with him, and I considered him, and I still do consider him a friend. So when I came to Malta, it was like meeting a friend of mine for the first time in a year. So he said, "I'm doing this Hex thing. You wanna do? Let's trash talk. Let's trash talk Hex." So he took me out, and we took a camera, and he said, I said, "I don't know anything about. The only thing that I know is that you said that you were forking Bitcoin." And he said, "Yeah, it's so much more now." And then he said, I'll explain the project to you, and you can tell me your opinion. But that was before I knew that he had like a strategy with this. Like, he wasn't just trying to get my opinion on Hex. He was knowingly trying to get marketing his project through the opinions of other influential people in the cryptocurrency space. So I would be like the first victim. I'm going to be sensitive with my words now, because I get a lot of criticism every time that I demonize Richard's character, and I want to try to describe this as neutrally as I can. But it became kind of obvious, like shortly after he published the interview that he had with me, and I hadn't seen any interview like that happen before I did it. He released our conversation a bit later on, and then he had started to go like on a road show. So he was debating Stefan Livera, Peter McCormack, and it was very apparent that what he was trying to do was to get influential people to opine on Hex, but Hex is his domain, so he knows everything about the Hex project. So he can very quickly take a conversation around Hex into a domain where he's the more knowledgeable person, and then just crush the other person on their, like, based on their lack of knowledge of the Hex project. So he would have very contrived and elaborate explanations for everything in the Hex project. So when an uneducated person goes in and tries to call Hex a scam, then they would have to defend that. And it's very hard to defend that against Richard because he's very good at defending his project. But in my case, I think that I was very focused on the things that he said, and I gave him pushback on, like, when he said something, I would try to break that down and stick to the things that he said and not let those discussion pieces go away without actually clarifying what was said and what was the assumptions behind that. So the interview with me went better than it did for others because the other Bitcoin influencers, they ended up actually giving more fuel to the fire when it came to the marketing effort of Hex, because they were the ones that ended up looking stupid. In my case, because it went better for me, I sort of became like the natural critic for Hex as time went by. And I told Richard during the interview that he said, are you gonna change your mind after you have studied more about this project? And I said, well, I'm gonna have to, study the mechanism more, and if it's worthy of my time, then I will study the system in detail. And then a year passed, and it never occurred to me that it would be sufficiently interesting enough to go into the nitty-gritty of the project. I was studying other things like Ethereum scaling solutions, and Hex didn't show up as something that I needed to pay attention to because it was still this sort of rudimentary system that just inflated the Hex supply based on how much Hex you staked, but I didn't understand what was the breakthrough of Hex, and I still don't understand what is the breakthrough of Hex today, unfortunately for me. So yeah, but that's why the Hex community is looking to get my opinion on the Hex project, because they saw that during the interview with Richard, I let him talk, and well, I'm not sure if I let him talk, but I was listening to what he said when we stuck to the actual mechanics of the project, and I didn't just started name calling it things. So they think that if Richard and I had a discussion again, then interesting things would come out of that conversation. So I'm continuously being brought back into the Hex conversation, even though I don't want to be in the Hex conversation, because I get so much criticism from the overall cryptocurrency community that like a number of close friends of mine in the cryptocurrency space told me after the Hex community came out, like, how could you participate in this very obvious marketing tactic? And to me, it wasn't an obvious marketing tactic because I was one of the first people that got interviewed for that in that cause, and I didn't know anything about the Hex project when we had the interview. But now that I do know everything, then now I can make a decision and say, do I want to be on camera with Richard talking about this and potentially using my clout within the cryptocurrency industry to draw attention to the Hex project. So I made it, and I get so much criticism for that. Why can't you make your own mind about whether or not it's the right thing to interview Richard or not? Why do you listen to what other people think? And it's not like, if it was up to me, I do enjoy debating Richard, but I don't enjoy having to have a huge argument with tons of people in the cryptocurrency community defending why I'm debating Richard. It's just not worth the energy spent. So for that reason, I don't want to spend time having to defend why, like, Hex is not that of a virtuous or important scientific innovation for me to spend hours and hours of convincing people of what I did when I interviewed Richard the second time, or getting interviewed by Richard the second time, wasn't an ethically wrong thing to do. So I'm just staying away from the thing. But you guys reached out, and you've been trying to get me on this interview for I think it was a couple of months ago that you reached out, and then I saw that you guys are working with a friend of mine, and I thought, okay, well, I want to help out, so that's why I'm here.
Much appreciated, mate. Much appreciated. So, I think it's safe to say that your view back then and your view today is pretty much the same.
There are some things that I didn't understand initially about Hex that I can sympathize more with today. Like, for instance, the argument that when you stake Hex, like, in my opinion, and why the reason why I call it the dumbest fucking thing that I've ever heard in my entire life, was because staking Hex doesn't secure any blockchain. Like, when you stake Ethereum, you are participating in the proof of stake consensus algorithm, and you are providing security to the Ethereum system. So that makes sense to pay people to do that type of activity in Ethereum tokens. Or you're providing liquidity to DeFi protocol, and other people can leverage that to get a better price for their assets that they're trading, or they can get leverage when they trade. So those things make sense to have a yield for. But in the Hex system, you're just locking up your Hex tokens, and then you get more Hex tokens. Why? Like, what's the purpose of that? That's why I think it's pretty stupid, like, pointless thing. But the thing that I didn't account for then is the argument that, well, when you stake your Hex, you take some Hex out of circulation, and the value of the unstaked Hex, it goes up in value. So, and the people who are then unstaked, they benefit from that constrained liquidity, that they are one of the few that are unstaked, so they get a higher price for their Hex, so they can sell their Hex for more. Like, it's difficult to see, like, what's the societal benefit to all of this, that some people are staking their Hex and they're earning part of the Hex supply, some people get a higher value for their Hex. Like, it's not that they haven't invented a mechanism that creates a secure blockchain. Like, Hex doesn't secure the Ethereum system. It might do in terms of, like, generating some minor extractable value in that sense, but that's very marginal to the overall MEV that's being generated by the Ethereum system. Have I changed my opinion about Hex? I mean, I recognize that you can play around with this staking and unstaking dynamic, so that, like, let's say for instance, I have $100,000, or let's say I have $100,000 in Bitcoin, and let's say that I'm planning to have some of this $100,000 for, like, let's say I want to take $60,000 and I want to save it for 5 years. If I have the ability to stake that $60,000 and keep my $40,000 liquid, now my $40,000, if everybody else also does that, maybe the $40,000 of tokens will go up in value, because as more people are trying to buy the token, the liquidity is constrained. So then I can now sell the $40,000 for more, and the $60,000 that I locked up, they will also have grown in numbers. So if I was already planning to hold that 60%, then now I have more tokens also. So it didn't hurt me in any way. Like, I both benefited from the higher price of the unstaked, like the liquid part of my checking account, and I also benefited in my savings account. So this is the interesting dynamic of the Hex protocol that I didn't pay attention to or didn't understand in the initial interview. But my counter argument to that is, okay, well, if I have $100,000 worth of Bitcoin and I'm planning to save 60% of that for the long term, I can just save 60% of that for the long term in a cold wallet, and the effect will still be the same. Like, it will be like if I put it in a cold wallet, or like the thing that Hex does, it forces you to stake. Like, if you want to unstake, you get a penalty, right? So it forces you to stay staked with that amount that you initially wanted to. So it sort of artificially puts some pressure in making the supply more scarce. But you definitely have the same type of dynamic in Bitcoin, where there are long-term holders that just take their supply that they don't want to spend, they want to save it for the long term, and that also gets taken out of circulation, so to speak, and it makes the liquid, the number of tokens that you can actually buy on exchanges, you have the same type of effect, right? You don't actually need to pay people who are just holding their coins for the long term. You don't need to pay them in extra tokens in order for the liquid part of the supply to go up in value. So I don't think that part of the mechanism, that complexity of the thing, like I don't think that it's motivated in Hex. Like, yes, there is a dynamic there. You can play around with it. There's some potential, like you can force people to stake for a longer period of time, and it makes the supply even like forcibly constrained. People can't change their mind as easily as in Bitcoin when they just go back to. But I mean, people want to have the ability to be able to access their money, right? By forcing them to stake, by locking them into this game where they accumulate more Hex and then punishing them if they want to go out. Like, what if something happens in my life? Like, what if my mother gets sick and I need that money? Now I get punished for trying to access that money. I don't think that necessarily is a good, like that the difference between Bitcoin and Hex in that regard, with having this mechanism, speaks in favor of Hex. It's different, yes, but I'm not sure that it's necessary to have that. I don't see that it's societally beneficial to have that mechanism.
How do you think Richard feels about constantly being called a scammer? Do you think it gets to him at all?
Well, I think that Richard had been in the cryptocurrency industry long enough to know which type of actions would get labeled as what. So I don't think that it came to surprise at all to Richard. Well, maybe he did get like so in love with his own project that he genuinely thought that, because with me, when he had the interview with me, like he was saying to me multiple times, like I genuinely think that I've invented something new here. And I was like, Richard, you told me back in 2018 that you were just forking Bitcoin like for the heck of it, right? And now you've created this. Now all of a sudden your creation is like a miracle from God. Like how is that just marketing tactic, or do you genuinely believe that? And for a long time I thought that this was just a marketing tactic by Richard, but having like spoken to Richard multiple times since then, like on the phone, I do think that he does actually think that what he has created is revolutionary. So he has either swallowed his own marketing material to the extent that he actually believes, and I think that that's the case. So like if you would have gone back a couple of years and you said, Richard, what would you have thought about a guy that created a token and then he controlled 90% of the supply of that token, and in order to get that token you had to send like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of ether to a specific address that somebody controlled, and that money just gets siphoned out of the system, and then you have this sort of redundant circular game where people are staking to earn more of the same token. Like, what would you think about that type of game where somebody owns 90% of the supply, and then he would say, oh, this sounds like somebody's probably trying to create some type of Ponzi or some type of scam. Like, he would probably have thought that himself if he didn't like. But now that he has created this thing himself and he has thought about it for a very long time, I think that he thinks that Hex fits into a specific category of a pumpamental game that does not shouldn't be labeled as such. So I think that Richard is genuine in some way when he boasts this innovation as revolutionary in some way. So I think that he is being genuine when he says that, but I think that he has spent so much time on it that maybe there's like a curse of falling in love with your own invention. Like if you spend a lot of time on something, it's your baby, right? And he has done a lot of work on it, like getting someone to code the thing, audit the thing. It has never been exploited. The Hex system has never been exploited. It is transparent. Tons of other DeFi protocols have rug pulls and exploits and oracles and centralized components to it. The only point of centralization in the Hex system is the massive amounts of supply that Richard owns. But technically speaking, there isn't this reliance on centralized Oracle feeds or anything like that. So there's some parts, like there's some elegancy to the Hex design that other projects that exist out there don't have. So maybe for that reason, that's the reason why he feels that he shouldn't get criticized. And I think that DeFi also blurred the lines so much, because during the DeFi summer, like, do you remember all of these like yam tokens and like the food tokens and there were tons of like elements to that didn't, like, they weren't providing any value. It's just like a game where you try to accumulate more of the token and then you try to sell before everybody else. Like, it's just a musical chairs game where you're staking for the high APY and you're trying to sell before everybody else does. And people were doing that, like, it's fun. And then if other people get to do that, why? Then Richard feels like, why don't I get to do that? And I think that this sort of thing in DeFi sort of happened naturally. Like, people started to do these games incrementally, but with Richard it was planned long before that, and it was very contrived from the beginning. And he also owns way more of the tokens than I've seen in any other. I'm sure there are tons of other DeFi projects out there, but none of them are as high profile as Hex is, where a single actor controls as much of the supply as Richard does. So I think the DeFi summer and the craziness of all that and the circular loops in the economy of DeFi sort of blurred the lines for what people thought was acceptable, and I think that he felt that he was unjustly placed in in the category of a scam. But it has to do with, I think, the timing, and because he started this before DeFi summer happened, and it wasn't organically contrived. It was more like a game that Richard had put out the rules for, and he made, like, the creator of the Hex project. They made hundreds of millions of dollars in what they sold the Hex tokens for, and all of it went to an address that said, like, this is the product is finished, and we're just going to take the money and do nothing now. Well, maybe we're going to market the project, but we're not going to innovate. Like, we're not going to develop the thing anymore. Like, it's finished. So I think that's pretty unusual that a DeFi founder raises that much capital for himself and then just leaves the project to be running on its own after that. You could argue that he is keeping the technical innovation going for the Hex project with the PulseChain thing. We can go into that. There's tons of things that can be said about PulseChain, whether or not, I mean, it's a fork of Binance Smart Chain. They haven't done that much to change the Binance Smart Chain fork to make the argument that raising hundreds of dollars worth of Ether for the Hex project makes sense. Like, he hasn't spent hundreds of dollars worth of Ether to develop the PulseChain system. Like, that's a pretty rudimentary system that is just trying to create a minimum viable product for an Ethereum fork, basically.
You know, I listened to your conversation with Kyle.
Yeah. Kyle Barr.
4 hours long it was or something, but I got through it. A lot of good stuff in there, but let's continue here, because we're making progress, but slowly. Part of my efforts with this documentary is to reach the newbies, people that are entering this space with great interest, but not very, very clear on the basic fundamentals. How do you prove decentralization?
How do you prove decentralization?
If I'm looking at a project and I'm considering putting some coins in there, what's a quick way that a newcomer can identify these core?
Yeah, it is difficult to prove decentralization if you cannot read code. If you can read and understand code, and you can run, for example, the Bitcoin client, and you can see what it does, and you can understand that the amounts of proof of work that is behind each block, that there's like these tokens aren't coming out of thin air. There's genuinely electricity being burned for almost equal the value. Like you can look at the hashes and say, okay, that's, like if I try to come up with that number, like that hash value on my computer, I can't do it. So there must be like some supercomputer somewhere doing that. And then you can look at how your client is pairing with other nodes. Where am I getting information from? Like, am I just listening to a central server to tell me about the blocks in the system that are coming in, or am I getting it from multiple nodes? Can I look at the connections?
So you need some. It's quite sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to prove the decentralized, like for yourself, you need to be a technical person. But if you're not a technical person, then you have to do your research about the project and speak to people that you believe to be legitimate, that are legitimate people with scientific rigor to describe what is happening inside of this system. And so if you're not a technical person at all, it comes down to trusting people around you. But I mean, you're not going to get tons of trustworthy, like if there's if every one of those people are trying to just scam you into saying that this thing, that when you double click the Bitcoin code, then it does this decentralized thing, like if that was untrue, then the way that the world works is that there are going to be people that say what these guys are saying to you is objectively false, and I can take you down. You have to spend some time with me, but we can look at what these guys are saying, and I can show you why it's false. And enough naysayers will come around, and then you can become unsecure and say, I don't really know if I should trust it or not. But with the Bitcoin project and all the technical people, like, because the reality of the project is such that the client does, peer with tons of other nodes in the network, and there is proof of work behind each block, then the world can, like people in the world can understand that this project is decentralized. But
that's their project. I mean, Bitcoin's been around for 10 years plus, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking more about these DeFi projects specifically. Something I've been learning about lately are NFTs, and I have this idea where when you buy organic food, you get like a certificate or a mark of approval that this is certified organic produce. Now, bear with me for a second, but is it possible that you could somehow utilize this NFT technology in a similar manner for DeFi projects? Everyone's claiming they're decentralized. If you could figure out a way to have an NFT that had some sort of community voting mechanism baked into it that allowed projects to register themselves or try to acquire this certification of decentralization, is that something that could evolve, or is there obviously the way in which we distribute this mark of the certificate of decentralization, it would have to be decentralized itself. We wouldn't be able to use traditional centralized organizations like you do with the organic food or what have you. So is that something that you can see on the horizon so that a newbie coming in can quickly see, okay, it's, they've worked very hard to get that mark of approval, because all I have to do is understand how that is issued?
Like short answer, yes. I think something like that could be created. I don't want to get too specific into whether or not this could be called an NFT, or if it because what you're really trying to get here is that you're trying to like you can have a contract on Ethereum. The contract has an address, and if enough people sign it from addresses that you trust, then through your interface you can see this mark of approval. Whether or not this mark of approval needs to be in the form of an NFT or just your user interface telling you that these people in my web of trust or in this community, in this DAO, they have signed this contract. Like you could use the Ethereum name server, like the ENS system, to do this and see. So what I could do in ENS is that I could provide a signature there on another contract, and that says that Eric Wall says that he thinks this project is trustworthy. And then if you have a number of people in the Ethereum community that you trust, and you say, okay, I trust that guy, then your interface can tell you, okay, it's more than 10 people saying that this is a legitimate project. And then you can also have people that countersign and say that I think this is a scam, and then it reduces the count, like so it can
Exactly.
invalidate. So yeah, you can build something like that.
I think I'm going to try to build it on PulseChain.
On PulseChain.
Why not?
Because during the PulseChain race, in the last hours of the PulseChain race, there was a you know how the pulse supply is being distributed, right?
I've been monitoring it. Yes.
And there was so you had to send tokens to a so-called sacrifice address, and there were about $700 million raised, and then in the very last hours, another 13 billion came in. So, and those 13 billion came in Hex tokens. Who owns 13 billion in Hex tokens? Well, Richard. So he ended up coming in and dominating, what is it, like 95% of the, he's going to own the vast majority of the pulse supply because he donated to himself in the pulse sacrifice race. Now, if PulseChain is going to be it's going to be a fork of Binance Smart Chain, and the Binance Smart Chain, in order to become a validator there, you have to stake a number of tokens, then you can become a validator. Well, I mean, I guess you can verify, is this big Pulse token holder actually using their Pulse tokens to become a validator? So I guess you can reduce that risk for yourself by looking at the addresses and seeing how it's used. But like, why would you do it on PulseChain that started out as a Binance Smart Chain fork, where 95% of the tokens in the system used for the consensus mechanism was controlled by the founder of the project? That seems like a pretty stupid platform to start your project on, when there are other there are other Ethereum killers out there, like Solana, for instance. Like, if you want sound bites for this documentary, I'm trying my absolute best not to give you any sound bites, because you listened to that 4-hour-long conversation that I had with Kyle, and I did not want to. I didn't want to do that podcast in the first place. I got sucked in by the Hex community to, like, Eric, why aren't you interviewing Richard? Why aren't you opining on Hex? And I thought that I could put some mysteries to rest. Like, what does Eric Wall think about? I thought the question was, what does Eric Wall think about Hex now that the price has gone up so much? Has he revisited his stance? Like, what, and why isn't he debating Richard? The community wanted answers, so I thought that I was doing the community a service by going on record for 4 hours to talk about the thing. And I didn't have like, that wasn't something that I had in my calendar time really to do. I was like very busy, but I did it anyway, and I thought that now I've done this for them, because I got a lot of appreciation from the Hex community initially. They said that I was the only one that could speak like face to face with Richard and be at his intellectual level. So I thought, like, because they like me and they've said nice things about me, I owe it to these people to tell them honestly what my opinion is. So I thought that I was doing them like a community service, and then they got so angry from that. Like, I got so much hate from that interview, and they didn't like what I was saying at all. Now I'm trying to be like, they took a lot of issue that I because I was in that conversation. I had a Hex proponent, like Kyle. He took the side of the proponent, and I took the side of the critic. So I was saying the things that I think that he needs to defend, and he was saying the things that he thinks that I need to defend. But they didn't like to hear those, I was theorizing around Richard, like what's his ethical and like, his morals like, and why is he doing things. And they didn't like, hearing me not go on camera with Richard, but sit with another guy and talk so much about like the character of Richard. They didn't think that it was fair for me to do that, and I should have that conversation with Richard face to face. So for that reason now, like I don't want to have to go through that again, like spending my time to try to contribute to something and then get just tons of hate back. I'm not in the game here to, aggravate people. I'm trying to just provide my honest opinion on things. And now after that interview, I thought I'm not gonna, obviously my opinions on Hex are not being appreciated. Like the people who listen to the podcast, they get angry. And the people who don't like the Hex project, they're angry that I'm doing the interview with Kyle in the first place. So I'm just upsetting everyone by doing this, and why am I spending my time on it? So for that reason, and I thought, okay, I'm not an appreciated individual in this topic of discussion, so I'll just back away from it. But I keep getting sucked back in. But now that I am sucked back in, I'm trying to monitor my words and not say things that upsets people. I'm trying to just, tell my honest opinion without bias, or I'm just trying to be a bit more cognizant and sensitive about the things that I say.
Hexicans often compare Richard to a typical CEO, not hiding away, getting behind his product, etc. They really respect him for that, unlike Satoshi running off for an anonymous group of people. What do you make of that proposition?
Well, I think that there are, Richard has a lot of fans, and I definitely understand that, because before the whole Hex thing, I could look at Richard Hart's videos and listen to this guy speak, and he's a bit mesmerizing. Like it's very interesting to hear him go through his thoughts and opine on things, and he addresses problems and topics from all possible corners, and like it's from the first moment I heard him talk, I understood that he and I were going to be friends. So I think that a lot of people probably feel that way because of that's his charisma. So for that reason, I think that people genuinely love Richard, and they want him to be around. They want to be around him. They want to listen to him speak, and they want him to think for them, because Richard has thought about a lot of things more than the average person has. Richard can speak about longevity and those types of things for ages, and say many intelligent things about that subject. And there's not a lot of people that, like me personally, I'm also a longevity fan, and I don't hear that many people having very long, interesting conversations about why longevity is so important, and why you should, like I personally, I've written like my own blog posts about, like if you believe longevity is possible, and that you can escape the period in time in which humans die by just expanding your lifespan into the age where humans don't die, the types of things that you can achieve and experience is, like, it's ridiculous to focus on your current lifespan if your infinity is within your reach, right? And the types of experiences and the way that you can develop your psyche with modern technology after artificial intelligence reaches when we have a super AGI, an artificial general intelligence that is more clever at doing things than humans are, and can improve itself faster than humans can improve the computer, then we reach escape velocity in terms of technological innovation also. So we could very well end up in, like 100 years from now, if we stay alive until then, we could live like virtual experiences in the holodeck. Like if you've seen Star Trek, the holodeck, like you can just choose for yourself what you want to experience, and you can experience a heaven that is more beautiful than the heavens that any type of religion has described. And you can expand your consciousness in ways that no religion can promise that it can be done for you, because every religion is constrained to the confines of the current human brain. But with technology, we can expand. You can expand your ability to comprehend things. If you think about, like, let's complement the human brain with more resources to think, to store your thoughts, and to expand your consciousness. That is like theoretically, scientifically possible. And Richard talks about those things. And if you don't have a lot of, thoughtful people in your immediate surrounding, you don't have people that you can discuss these types of topics with, and you get into crypto because you want to make a quick buck, and then you start to listen to this guy, and then you get sucked into this whole worldview of things. That's why I think that they feel like they listen, they appreciate the things that he has to say, they agree with him on almost everything, and some things are perhaps more like the nuances of Hex being a scam or not gets filtered out by the price going up. So they buy into to Richard Hart as a person, they buy his token, the token goes up in value, and they become rich, and they love Richard, and everything's just amazing for them, and of course they want him to stay around.
Yeah, we often hold up our founders, tech founders these days, the Zuckerbergs and what have you, and the Elon Musks, and often parallels are drawn by the Hexicans with Richard, but there's something that doesn't quite gel there for me, because a CEO or a founder of a company is, there's a clear central point there. How can you have this parallel be drawn by the community of Richard being this centralized figure, king maker? And then on the other side of the conversation, talk so heavily about decentralization and everything's.
Yeah, that's one.
It's a contradiction, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one contradiction. Another contradiction is, there's so much talk about like delayed gratification, like they combine these elements of philosophy into, and I mean, why Hex works the way it does, and with its like the forced staking is it forces you to delay gratification, right? Is what Richard talks about. But you look at Richard himself, and he's like the epitome of immediate gratification. Like he's literally wearing Louis Vuitton bags. Like if you watch the latest, when he's in Copenhagen, there's a Louis Vuitton jacket, and there's like Louis Vuitton bags. Like it looks horrendous, and it's just, and he's been like that ever since the beginning with watches and fancy stuff, and his entire YouTube set, like the stage that he has, is way more decorated than anybody else in the crypto space does. So there's a lot of things that will resonate with people who are materialistic, that attracts people, and then the only thing that Hexicans are talking about is the price going up, but at the same time they're trying to adhere to these delayed gratification ethos of the project. So there's more and what you pointed out is one conflict, but I can identify a number of conflicts like that with the Hexican people, and I think it's easy to not want to see conflicts when you're making money and having a good time.
Myself, I did a stake.
You staked Hex.
I actually made a stake about 2 months ago. I thought, I'm gonna investigate this project, and I'm gonna make a documentary. I figured I'm gonna have to try the product, get in there and see what it's all about. And I think to date I'm about 50% down. Now what's interesting is in the app that everybody uses, the Hexicans Staker app, it shows you your balance in Hex. Even though you don't actually have any Hex, because when you
burned your
send
Hex,
it,
you have T-shirts, right? Yeah.
I asked them, why are you showing me this number? It's just, at the moment, it's going down. I see, okay, I got 13,000 Hex. It's worth half of what it was when I put it in. Why am I seeing this information? And
so what are you actually seeing in that? Are you seeing a number of Hex tokens that is going up, and then they give you account balance that
it's basically, well, they're called T shares and B shares, and what you get is, when you burn your Hex, they say you become a shareholder. So what I see here is my original stake, some information about the time in which I think I've staked for 1 year. I'm about 60 days into a 360-day stake. And yeah, essentially, you can see here, I have 839 billion shares currently. I don't actually have any Hex. This is the staker app in which the community have built.
But why was that confusing to you? Like, because it is true that once you stake your Hex, you get shares, right? And then when you unstake your Hex, when you burn your shares, you get your Hex back, right?
Yes, I wasn't clear on why this information was important when I don't actually own any Hex. Why is...
Well, because the shares can be converted back into Hex, right?
Yes, but not for another 300 days without a penalty.
No, exactly, yeah, that's true.
But also, all this app seems to have done actually has pissed me off, because when I started, it went up to $5,000, $6,000, and now it's at 2,000 something. So I don't talk about the price of the Hexicans because I know it can wind them up the wrong way, and the last thing I need is to wind these guys up on Twitter, because they already spit the dummy at the smallest of things.
But I have to disagree with you. I think that the interface here is quite clear. It says, like, if you, it says the net payout if ending stake now. It says that then the amount of value that you can get is 3.4k. But if you save it for the duration that you've so far accumulated, well, yeah, I mean, I suppose I understand what you're saying, that you're accumulating some interest now, but it's only at the maturity of that period that you actually get them, right? And it's perhaps this number.
It's just it's a user design decision that they've made, and I think it's somewhat disorientating.
Yeah, I suppose it's a way for you to track, because the interest rate can fluctuate depending on how many people are staking. So a way for you to understand, like, okay, am I earning more Hex? Like, am I earning more this month than I was the last month? Like, how is my stake position doing? That's why they show it like continuously as you go, because they don't actually know how much your position is going to grow.
No, there is a lot of apps like this, websites where you can plug your address in and get some sort of assumed outcome from this. But we'll see this time September next year when I unstake. We'll see what the results are of that. Let's address these last few. What has been lost in the grand vision for DeFi, when so many projects have controlling stakes in the protocols? There, these potential rug pulls. What have we lost?
I don't think that. I think if you create a platform for permissionless financial innovation, the natural inclination for people will be to build products that they can make as much money off as possible, even from the creators. Like, they will try to create systems where they build something and they gain something, right? So there will be a natural inclination towards borderline scammy products, because those tend to make the most money for the creator. So that's a negative side effect to creating an open permissionless platform where anybody can build anything, is that a lot of people will build Ponzi-like things. But I think that was known from the beginning. Like, if you create this type of platform, of course it's going to, like, if you build encryption chats, of course it's going to be used by criminal people and people that want to keep their child pornography safe. Like, that's a obvious use case for that technology. But does that mean that we should not enable liberating technologies where you can build and you can keep the information hidden that you want to be hidden? I think that's a trade-off that the people that created the Ethereum platform were willing to make, and I think that it's a fair trade-off to make, and I think that it will benefit society overall in time. I think that having the incumbents, the centralized middlemen control financial innovation in the way that they have done up until now is in the long term a worse outcome than having some people create Ponzi schemes and people participate in those games and they lose their money. I think that changing the fundamentals of the architecture itself is going to benefit people in the long term also. Like, for instance, you can't, it's very difficult for a person to earn money in a savings account today. Like with your bank account right now, you can't earn interest. But in DeFi, you can participate in becoming an automated market maker. So you can lend out your capital to market make according to the rules of a contract for you without a middleman there. And that potential, like there's people who are willing to pay for leverage and they are willing to pay for best possible price in order matching all the time. So there's always going to be some amount of yields that you can get there. So if your banker tells you, I can give you 0.5% interest on your savings, because DeFi works the way it does, it can provide yields to people, and it will. I mean, right now people are in situations where their money is losing value, and they have to throw it into equities and just gamble on the stock market, and the stock market reaches epically high proportions because the fiat system works the way it does, because you cannot hold on to your currency and you cannot get any yield from the banking system. I think that DeFi does provide an alternative way out of there that doesn't make you have to speculate in stocks. You can just provide liquidity to the market and earn yield from that, and sort of try to stay ahead of inflation that way. The best thing would be if we didn't have the monetary printing in the extent that we do, so we didn't need to protect ourselves from inflation. You can just hold on to the bitcoins that you have, and then the value of the currency will grow in value with the rate of GDP in a country. So you don't have to do anything with your money. You can just earn money from your employer, put it into your wallet, and then it grows in value over time. That would be, I think that's definitely something that should be an option for people. If they want to do that, they should be able to do that, instead of having to speculate on the equities market or be locked into savings accounts where they have 0% yield. So yeah, there's going to be tons of rug pulls and Ponzi schemes, but people can be a bit modest when they use these types of tools. They don't have to go for the fancy thing showing the highest APY figures, and they can try to trust people that have a track record and seem to be doing legitimate things, and not go for the fastest moving car, but just go for a car that seems safe and will get you from A to B. I think that the value add from the DeFi system overall is going to be a net positive for society. There are some people that are going to get burnt along the way, but it was the same thing with encryption, right?
It's a question of when, not if. And that makes me think, as we've seen with Richard creating him a sort of king out of himself, are we going to see more kings like Richard, do you think? Almost dictators of their own empire economies.
Yeah, I do think so, because and I think that you can, I mean, tokenization, we haven't really gotten into the whole aspect of social tokens yet in the cryptocurrency world. We have DAOs, and we have stable coins, and we have derivatives instruments and leverage and lending and all that. But what we don't have yet is, like, what if I create a token that gave I could create an NFT that gives the holder the ability to go on a phone call with me for 30 minutes each week, or have a virtual reality meeting with me, so he could sit next to me and pick my brain for 30 minutes. Like, if I sell that token now, then it will be assigned a market value. If I sold that on OpenSea, then it would be assigned a market value. But if I'm very successful in the industry, and the person who bought that token can sell it 5 years from now, then he can make a buck, right? He can earn money because the demand for my time has grown in value. So, and I've done some research into this, and what you want to avoid is having this token be labeled a security. Like, this would fall under the category of credits for time, and those are typically not securities. They can become securities if you market them as an investment opportunity. So I think that you'll see these type of social tokens, and I'm just describing one use case, right? You get the ability to interact with someone 30 minutes each week, and you can sell it later on. It makes talent scouts out of people. So when you are listening to someone, you're not only like getting information from them, but you can also invest in their future progress without having it be an investment contract. So it doesn't have to be a security contract, which means it can be in DeFi, and people who create them they don't get fines for creating them. And I think we're going to see thousands of these types of tokens. Like, you could have a token that gives you ensure that the person who holds this token will always have the ability to be on your closed friends list on Instagram, for instance. That could be something that a popular girl could earn a lot of money if she sells it when she's not attractive, and then she becomes extremely attractive, and now you have tons of people that want to buy the token. So I think that, like, in the current internet culture today, we have simps and simp idols. Like there's people who love a person because they're beautiful or smart or whatever, and those are the simps. And then you have the simp idols, and that's what the people that they idolize. And if the simp idols can tokenize their future progress, then their simps are now going to be investors with them. So they're going to be with them on the journey into the future and earn the revenues from what they can create, and it's going to tighten the bond between the fans and the creator in a new way. And Richard is is only scratching the surface of that. So I definitely think that we're gonna have like guilds centered around important, lovable characters where people just devote themselves to a person and want to help them become even more successful because they're now financially invested in that person's future also. So I think that individual people can and will build empires using cryptocurrency infrastructure as the funding and tokenization mechanism to create those hierarchies.
Final question. According to the Hexican community, I've been trying to identify the god whales, and it's come to my attention that there are 12 of them. So I think I've identified about 3 of them so far. If you designed Hex, what would be their function?
So god whales would be people that own a massive amount of T-shares, then, I suppose, right? Or how much? Where do you set the definition for god whale? How many?
I've come to understand god whales as liquid hex
liquid hex holders. Okay.
Not stake.
Okay. So how much hex? Like how many millions of dollars worth of hex, or how many hex tokens do you?
Even hundreds of millions of dollars worth of hex.
Yeah.
They move the market when they do their thing.
You're asking me what I think that the role of them should be.
Had you designed Hex?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get inside Richard's head through your head, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would be the function there?
When the Hex system launched, you didn't really have control of who would become these god whales, right? The god whales were the ones that acquired the most number of Hex through the Hex contract, or through claiming Hex through proving their Bitcoin ownership, right? So I don't think that Richard had any ability in handpicking them unless he gave them the Hex himself. I don't know if he did that, so I don't think that I don't have any reason to believe that he has elected or chosen the god whales.
They've chosen him.
Yeah. Well, they've chosen Hex and Richard. It's the same thing.
I'll throw one more in. When it comes to people labeling projects as scams, it often circles around to the idea of a rug pull, sorry. And that a rug pull is essentially an individual that owns an enormous. It was known as pre-mining when it was proof of work. That just the fact that there is this potential, is this what gives a project the categorization of a scam? Is this the defining?
I think that the reason, people who label Hex a scam probably do so because the lack of apparent utility to the Hex system and the very apparent beneficiary, which is the origin address. So there's one address that earns hundreds of millions of dollars, and to the other people that look at the system, it looks like a musical chairs game. It looks like a roulette table where half of the the spinning wheel is green, and every time it goes, the house wins. Like Richard wins all the time in this game. So that's why I think that's the reason. Like there's just no clear utility to this staking mechanism. People are earning inflation of the currency itself, and they're earning money from the people that are not being staked, and like they're earning a portion of the supply from the people who choose to be unstaked. The lack of apparent utility in that, in combination with someone earning a huge amount of money, in combination with a guy who's using very aggressive marketing tactics in terms of the APY figures that are flashing. I think it's the combination of those things, and also the contempt among Bitcoiners that used to think that Richard was on their side. And for many of those Bitcoiners, you don't even have to be. It doesn't even have to be like Hex. Like they even think that Ethereum is a scam. So you don't have to go that far to find people in the Bitcoin community, as long as they, put any ticker symbol in their profile, they're going to call you a scammer. So like Bitcoiners label almost everything that isn't Bitcoin a scam that has a token. So there's tons of people that are going to label Hex a scam for that reason, because it's not Bitcoin. And then there's going to be some people that don't typically call everything a scam, but would still go as far as calling Hex a scam because the lack of apparent utility and the very clear beneficiary, the person who benefits the most from this product. And then, like, I don't call Hex a scam. I've called it the dumbest fucking thing that I've ever heard in my entire life, but I haven't called it a scam. And I mean, it is transparent how the game works, but I think that it's maybe a bit, it's intentionally pushing the sensitive spots in humans when you're flashing these APY figures. So it's very like it's very aggressively marketed, and I do also agree that the utility is kind of vague for this project, and I also agree that there is a person who earns unsubstantiatedly from this. Like there's no doesn't make a sense that I mean the origin adders can still sell like 90% of the supply and rug pull if they wanted to, and whether or not it does is a different question, but giving somebody that much power in a so-called decentralized project is also highly questionable. It is transparent how much the origin adders owns, but it's not talked about. Like I would equate like the origin address as something as of a kill switch in the system, because it can in 5 minutes time or in one block bring the hex price down to 0. So effectively it can eradicate all the value out of the hex system immediately with the push of a button in one person's hand. That is a point of centralized control of the system, even though that it's transparent and like it's not like an oracle or an admin key, but in my opinion it is like an admin key, but it is transparent how it works. So you could argue that it's a transparent admin key, and there are tons of projects that have admin keys which I don't call scams. Like being centralized doesn't necessarily equate you to being a scam.
And that's an important distinction to make, because I assume that's because those other projects are registered corporations that handle.
No.
Whereas Richard's is an anonymous, or he won't admit that it's.
No, I mean a project can be 100% centralized, and I can still trust the team behind it, and I can think that the reason that they are centralized right now is because they're not finished with the product yet. Like you take a ZK Zinc, for instance. It's a ZK rollup that makes transactions cheaper in Ethereum, and that contract, like if you go into that contract, yeah, you can do all the things with the zero knowledge proof, and you aggregate transaction signatures, and you pay less when you're using the system, whereas if you were using the base layer of the system. But they have an ability to upgrade the contract and change parameters of the system, so it's centralized. But I'm okay with that. I trust the team that they are good intentioned people. I don't have to look at a corporation to understand whether I should trust something or not. It can be from interacting with the people of the interacting with the people of that are the creators of the system, and I can make that distinction. Like, what's the chance that I'm going to get rug pulled here? Of course, it helps if you know that you can find the guy in reality and track him down and punch him in the face if he runs away with your money. But it depends. Like, I can trust a ZK Sync with $1,000. Yes, perhaps I wouldn't trust it with $1 million, but trusting it with a $1,000 or $10,000, just because it's centralized doesn't mean that it's a scam. I can still choose to make that trust based on my own risk tolerance and my assessment of the individuals involved.
Okay, and that's the thing, isn't it? Though, like, you would look at those founders, those individuals, you would know those are the they've admitted that they can. You can see that connection. But Richard often dances around this connection with him and the...
Yeah, he says that he has to dance around it for securities law reasons.
Exactly, and I try to understand why that's such an issue for his project and not others, because many other projects have had that, they've addressed that, right?
Well,
is he living in some sort of decentralized utopian world where he thinks that it's irrelevant, but the authorities and the regulators believe it is relevant? That he...
yeah, I think it's because many DeFi protocols today, they have like reverse airdrops based on how much you interacted with the protocol, or they have liquidity mining schemes. But Hex was a very classical token sale, right? You sent money to a contract, you got Hex. So the other founders that are public with their identities and they have tokens and they have APY associated with their token, people don't do those types of classic token sales that Richard did, because he launched his product before these liquidity mining inventions were popular. So I think it's because he used a more classically labeled securities associated mechanism to get the money that he sold Hex for. So I think for that reason, the nature of how the fundraise was conducted, fundraise, I don't know if I should call it a fundraise or just donation, yeah. The nature of that donation carries more direct connections to securities laws violation than other projects do.